Hi.
Hey. Hello, and welcome to another one of the Arizona Capitol Times video Q&As, a new feature we've started doing during our lockdown. I'm Julia Shumway. I cover the state senate at the Arizona Capitol Times, and I'm joined today by Joe Ferguson, a Pima County Constable.
Hello.
So, Joe, to start off, can you tell our readers or viewers a little bit about what exactly a constable does?
Sure. I serve papers from the Pima County Justice Court. For me, I have an area around the University of Arizona, so one of the big things that I serve are orders of protection. Other papers that I serve are summonses and different types of writs, including writs to evict people from their homes. So right now, we're really busy with evictions during this pandemic. Thankfully, the governor answered my prayers and extended the executive order on evictions. So we're doing less, but certainly it's a very busy time right now to be a constable.
Right, and let's talk some more about the executive order having to do with evictions. So back in late March, the governor put out an order that has been described as a moratorium on evictions, but it sounds like that did not entirely stop them. What effect did it have on the ground?
So down here in Pima County, we have definitely seen a spike in them. And so let's just go back a little bit before the eviction order, or before the governor's order. My office announced earlier in that month that we weren't going to do any evictions as the COVID pandemic raged. So we decided, all 10 constables, Democrats and Republicans, decided not to do any evictions at all until the governor acted. So we put a moratorium on even before the governor did, because we realized that we didn't have PPE, we didn't have guidance from the court, we didn't know what to do if we encountered somebody that was sheltering in place. So we did that. About a week after we did that, the Pima County courts down here decided to stop doing all evictions that were related to fees. So if somebody owed money and that was the only real issue that was going on, they delayed those hearings until early June. And so that's when we started seeing an uptick again in evictions. The governor's executive order did delay those types of evictions. And then the only ones that were being processed for about a month and a half were ones related to somebody not, that were breaking the lease in some way. So they had too many roommates, they were doing criminal damage, there was accusations of crimes being committed inside the property, a violation of their lease. Those were the kinds that we were getting. And so in some cases, the evictions went forward because, there was a present danger to both the people inside the building and maybe their neighbors. But we still did a lot of evictions that were delayed. I can remember some that we did where somebody was given an eviction order, but they were 65 and they were covered by the executive order. So we delayed those too. So evictions had been trickling in before June here in Pima County, but they were pretty small amounts compared to what we're seeing now. Now we're seeing all sorts of people who are being evicted for a lot of reasons. I did a house that had 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, and there were 12 people living there, and they just hadn't paid rent since March. And so, that was an unusual one for me, but, again, being near the university, we see some that are financially motivated, and we see some that are, have to do with criminal issues.
And what was the process of lobbying the governor? As you said, he answered your prayers in extending this. Why are constables like yourself pushing to make sure that people aren't getting evicted?
I sound like a politician when I say this, but when I took this job, I took it as both a politician and as somebody who is serving papers. I went a lot farther than just deciding that I would do what the work was, and I wanted to advocate. So our constable's office down here, we launched an early notification program last year to get to the people who don't go to court. Our analysis found about 90% of people never go to court for their eviction. So the eviction happens in court without them. They don't have any idea of the timetable. All they know is they owe their landlord money. And so we would show up and we would find people there who didn't know what was going on. So we wanted to de-escalate that. So our office has become very political in a lot of ways. And we realized that, an eviction moratorium during a pandemic like this was the right thing to do. We ask people when they're interested to learn about constables, how do you evict an 85-year-old when it's 103 degrees outside? For us, the answer is we don't. We look for other solutions. We look for ways to not force somebody's grandmother out on the street when it's triple degrees temperatures. And that means working with nonprofits. That means working with the housing departments. That means working with anybody who will work with us to try to find a different solution than just putting people out on the streets. And so the moratorium, this pandemic, really is the best tool in our toolbox right now to help families stay together and help people stay inside. I have certainly come in contact with people of all ages. I mean, there was a college student that had COVID that was they wanted to evict. I ran into a woman who was so sick that she couldn't get to her eviction hearing, and when she tried, the court, turned her away because she was so sick. And so, this is the right call, and only now in Pima County in the state do we really feel like those resources that were allocated months ago with the governor's budget are really beginning to get to people. I know people who have applied for the eviction prevention funds back in April, and they just got them. And so the city of Tucson is going to roll out a eviction prevention grant next week, which is great. And it's going to help a lot of families, but it's not being rolled out till next week. And so if that moratorium wasn't extended, we would have had a real problem of, people being homeless before we could, help keep them in their homes.
And how, it sounds like the city of Tucson's grant is one way to do this. The governor's allocations of funding toward statewide rent assistance seems like another way to help. But how do we make sure that come October 31st, your office isn't being forced to go and evict a lot of people from their homes who haven't paid rent in months?
So, the new version of the moratorium actually requires that people who to get to stay in their homes has to apply for those programs or has to apply for programs with other nonprofits. And, that's pretty key. I mean, before that was in place, we could keep people in their homes, but there was no requirement that they ask for help. And so these two now marry them together. And hopefully that means that their funding will come in, people can pay their back rent, and they can stay in their homes. And so that's good for both landlords and tenants. And for those who are skeptical, I want to remind them that both the state program and the city program that we're going to announce, those dollars go directly to the landlord. They get paid first. And so in the name of the tenants. And those requirements are very strict. So that means the landlords are getting paid. And when they get paid, they're required to keep tenants in their property for 30 days, 60 days, depending on the program.
And even prior to the pandemic, Arizona has been dealing with an affordable housing crisis. I know you're relatively new to the job, but had you seen evictions for lack of rent payment increasing, or did it seem like it was higher than it had been in previous years?
I mean, we've been carrying the numbers. We know that the numbers have been increasing. We also know that in Tucson, there is an affordable housing crisis going on where units that were, reasonably priced in Midtown have been bought up by companies. Everybody has been kicked out, and then they, raise the rent $300. So affordable housing in Tucson is a real problem, and it's not getting any better. Right now, there isn't any new units really going up that's addressing this crisis. So we see people living in smaller and cheaper places on the outskirts of town, and they're not always nice places to live. So it's a real issue, and I think that the pandemic has just made it worse.
Beyond the moratorium and the state rental assistance program, what can Governor Ducey and state lawmakers be doing to help people out?
Well, I mean, I think that if I'm speaking to that audience, I want to talk about unemployment. It's not something to be proud of how little we pay people on unemployment. Being one of the smallest amounts in the country tells me that it's time for us to address that in next year's budget. We need to be able to keep people who've been unemployed to be able to pay their bills and stay inside. It's not enough. I met a teacher yesterday who's got a Section 8 voucher, which means that part of his rent is paid, but he's unemployed and he gets $117 a week. I don't know how he lives on that. And because it's Section 8, some of that money still is going to housing from his unemployment check. That's just not enough to live on. I also don't think that your audience is going to be surprised for me to hear this, but I think that there needs to be some changes to the Landlord-Tenant Act. In this state, you can go from missing your rent payment on day 1 to being evicted on day 16. That's not a lot of time. And so I think those are some of the really big issues. Pima County is discussing doing something a little bit different. I don't know what it's like in Maricopa County, but having somebody who can talk to renters when they go to eviction court, so they have a legal resource, so they have a consultation, they have something to understand what their rights are when they go in for an eviction hearing. I've sat in on these eviction hearings, and if the tenant isn't there, they last a minute. If the tenant is there, they last 3 minutes. It's not a lot of time, and it's a very scary process. And so I think that sometimes people need more resources down here just to understand what the eviction process is. So, I know that the county attorney's race, that's something that's being discussed about putting a public defender in the justice court specifically set aside for talking to people for evictions.
And a lot of the times when cities and counties do try to make moves that might be considered more progressive or helping out impoverished people, they may get pushback from the state. We've got an entire state law, SB 1487, that exists. Yep. To take away, it allows the state to take away funding from cities if cities break any kind of state preemption law. How is Pima County able to take these steps that might be further than what the state is doing to protect renters?
Well, I mean, I think that, county attorneys have options in place on where they put resources for public defenders. And so I don't necessarily know that if this would trigger a 1487 complaint, but I think that there's a larger issue at play that people really need to understand. And that's if you evict somebody from a home, there's a ripple effect that goes a lot farther than that. You evict a family from their home, that might mean that your employee doesn't show up to work the next day. That might mean that those kids don't show up to school anymore. That might mean that they are in the streets, and those people are putting a further burden on law enforcement, on social service agencies and hospitals. And those are things that we really can't afford to do right now. So I think it's much cheaper to keep people in their homes and to help them find ways to work out positive win-win situations with their landlords than it does just to let evictions go unabated.
Great. Well, Joe, I don't think I have any other questions for you, but if there's anything else that you'd like to add, feel free.
No, if you are a tenant and you are facing eviction, as hard as it is to hear this, please talk to your landlord. I got to tell you that communication is the most important thing you can do in this crisis, is to talk to your landlord, tell them what's going on, because 80% of the time when I go to a landlord and I say, okay, we're doing the eviction today, what do I need to know? They tell me they haven't spoken to their tenants in weeks, months, and they don't know what's going on. So in this crisis, in this pandemic, please try to talk to your landlords. Please try to tell them what's going on. Many of them, I have found, are willing to work with their tenants to keep them in there and never involve somebody like me at all.
Well, thank you so much. And that
Sure.
was Joe Ferguson, a Pima County Constable, and we will be back next week with another interview with someone else. All right.
Thanks.